The salty breeze from the Pacific crashed hard against the glass doors of our villa, but the chill running down my spine had nothing to do with the cold. My fingers tightened around my phone as my father's voice echoed through the speaker with a calmness that was almost cruel. "It's done, Evelyn. The paperwork is finalized. The villa has been sold." For a moment, the world tilted. The rhythmic sound of waves colliding with the rocks below seemed to mock me. "You did what?" My voice trembled, a dangerous mix of disbelief and fury swelling in my chest. I gripped the balcony railing to steady myself. "You went ahead and did whatever you wanted, didn't you?" There was a long pause. On the other end, I could hear the faint creak of my childhood home's front porch swing in Santa Barbara. My father, Richard Harper, finally spoke, soft but resolute. "Vanessa needed help, Evelyn. She's your sister. Family looks after family." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, sharp and hollow. Of course, the family card. Always Vanessa. Always the daughter who could do no wrong. Always the daughter they sacrificed everything for, including me. My gaze swept across the familiar landscape of our seaside villa, the sprawling whitewashed deck, the vibrant bougainvillea curling along the wooden railings, the endless expanse of cobalt blue ocean stretching to the horizon. This villa wasn't just a house. It was the dream Logan and I built together, the proof of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every rejection we overcame. And they sold it behind my back. "You barely even use the place," my father continued, his tone growing defensive. "Vanessa's life is at stake. Her debt collectors are threatening her safety. Is this house really more important than your sister's life?" My knuckles whitened against the railing. "That's Vanessa's problem, not mine." My reply was ice cold, each word slicing through the heavy air. "You had no right." My father hesitated, his voice faltering for the first time. "We had your signatures. The documents were ready. You must have forgotten signing." My blood ran cold. "No, I never signed anything." I knew what this was: fraud, betrayal at the most unforgivable level. I stared at the horizon, heart pounding, breath shaky as realization sank in. My parents had crossed the one line I never thought they would. I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered, "You have no idea what you've just done." The wind off the Santa Barbara coast howled as I stood motionless on the balcony, memories clawing their way out of the locked chambers of my mind. The betrayal I felt wasn't born today. It had been woven into my life since the moment Vanessa took her first breath. I was 5 years old when I first learned that what belonged to me would never truly be mine. On my birthday, I had unwrapped the red bicycle I had dreamed of for months, my small hands trembling with joy as the shiny frame caught the afternoon light. But the happiness was short-lived. Vanessa, 2 years younger, toddled over, her eyes wide with fascination. Later that evening, my parents delivered the sentence with a shrug. "Vanessa wants it, Evelyn. You're the big sister. Let her have it." I protested weakly, voice cracking, but they dismissed me with the same tired phrase that would haunt my childhood. "You're older. You understand." I didn't, not then. Not when it happened again and again. My first day of elementary school brought a new pencil case with my name lovingly stitched on it. I barely had it for a week before Vanessa decided she liked it better. I was told, yet again, to be understanding. My parents' voices rang with the same empty reasoning. "Vanessa is still so young, Evelyn. She doesn't understand boundaries yet." But she did. Oh, she did. By the time we were teenagers, she had mastered the art of taking, and taking without consequence. When I wanted to enroll in swim lessons, my request was flatly denied. "Vanessa has piano lessons that cost too much already," my mother, Carol, explained casually over dinner. "Besides, Vanessa would feel lonely if you weren't there to help her with practice." Vanessa had piano lessons, ballet classes, art tutors. Money was never an issue for her dreams. but for mine, even a $10 club fee became unnecessary spending. I became the invisible daughter, the silent shadow standing just outside the spotlight that always followed Vanessa. On sports day, I crossed the finish line first, lungs burning, heart racing, searching the crowd for my parents' proud faces, only to find them kneeling beside Vanessa, who had tripped during her race and was sobbing dramatically on the grass. No one noticed me. No one cared. The applause was never mine. At an open house event, I stood confidently behind the podium as class president, delivering a speech I had practiced for days, my eyes searching the room for my family, but the seats where my parents should have been sat empty. I found out later they had gone to watch Vanessa's minor choir recital instead. She needed us, my father said. That sentence became the anthem of my life. When Vanessa needed them, they ran. When I achieved something, silence. I learned quickly not to tell them when I accomplished anything. When I was elected as a class representative in 6th grade, I came home and ate dinner like any other night. There was no point mentioning it. Even when I worked relentlessly to earn top grades and get accepted into my first choice university, my mother's response was barely a murmur. "That's nice, Evelyn. But have you seen Vanessa's mock test scores?" That night at dinner, every dish on the table was Vanessa's favorite. The celebration I had dreamed of never came, and I realized in that moment that I was completely alone. Christmas mornings were no different. Vanessa would squeal as she tore open boxes of expensive jewelry, designer purses, the latest electronics. I unwrapped practical gifts, socks, notebooks, a winter scarf. My parents didn't even pretend anymore. The final blow came when I asked for travel funds to attend a national competition with my college club. My father shook his head as if I had asked for the moon. "Vanessa's summer art camp fees are due, Evelyn. You'll have to figure something else out." I stopped asking after that. I stopped hoping. By the time I entered university, I had numbed myself to the endless cycle of disappointment. Vanessa's needs came first. Vanessa's tears always mattered more. I mattered less. So much less, but I was done being second best. I was done standing in her shadow. It was there, in the wind-battered dorms of my university campus, that my new life began, and I had no idea how one chance encounter would change everything. The first day I met Logan Matthews, the waves nearly swallowed me whole. The university's windsurfing club had sounded exciting when I signed up, a spontaneous decision made on a lonely afternoon after another empty phone call with my parents. But as I stood knee-deep in the cold Pacific off the shores of Santa Barbara, struggling to balance on a slippery board, regret came crashing over me faster than the waves themselves. I toppled over again, coughing as salty water stung my eyes and burned my throat. From the shoreline, a calm voice called out, "Don't fight it, feel it." I blinked up through dripping lashes to see him, tall, tanned from endless days under the sun, with dark hair windswept wildly and an easy, crooked smile that somehow made the chaos of my failure feel like less of a disaster. Logan Matthews, club captain, a junior who had the effortless confidence I secretly envied. "Everyone falls on day one," he said, holding out a hand to help me up. I fell harder. I hesitated, then took it, not knowing then that this small gesture of kindness would shift the axis of my world forever. Logan became my mentor on the water and, soon after, the anchor in my life. I didn't tell him at first how much his gentle encouragement meant to me, how no one had ever told me failure was okay, how no one had ever believed in me just for trying. One moment I still remember as vividly as the sunlight on the water, the last day of our spring training camp. I had failed to stand upright on my board even once. My teammates had long given up for the evening, and I was alone, exhausted, ready to quit. "Evelyn." Logan's voice cut through the crash of the waves, the winds shifting. "You've got this." I don't know what changed in that instant, but suddenly I could feel it, the pull of the current, the way the wind pressed against the sail. My legs locked, The board steadied and I rose. For the first time, I stood tall against the ocean. Cheers erupted from the shore, but I only saw Logan smiling wide as I glided across the waves. Later, as I collapsed breathless and exhilarated onto the sand, Logan flopped down beside me and nudged my shoulder. "You've got talent, Evelyn. You just don't know it yet." It wasn't just windsurfing. Logan taught me how to believe in myself, how to laugh at my mistakes, how to push past the voices that told me I wasn't enough. We spent hours training, studying together, sneaking late-night burritos after practice, talking about everything and nothing under starlit skies. Slowly, quietly, friendship became something deeper. We fell in love not with grand gestures, but with the simple, steady rhythm of two people who understood each other's silences. When I graduated, Logan and I stood outside my tiny rented apartment, the sun setting gold over the ocean, and he squeezed my hand. "What if we built something together?" he asked. "Our own business. No one else's rules, no one else telling us what we can't do." It was reckless. It was impossible. It was perfect. We scraped together what little savings we had. I juggled 3 part-time jobs, waitressing, tutoring, freelance writing, while Logan borrowed money from his family and picked up shifts as a sailing instructor. We leased a cramped office above an old bakery in downtown Santa Barbara, where the paint peeled and the heater rattled every time someone walked by, but it was ours. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched and secondhand. We sat on the scuffed floor with cheap takeout and drew our business plans in notebooks by candlelight when the power cut out. "This is our starting line," Logan laughed, raising a plastic cup of sparkling cider in a mock toast. I laughed too. For the first time in years, it was real, raw, and full of hope. The rejections came hard and fast. "You're too young. No experience. No track record." Doors slammed in our faces again and again, but we didn't quit. We traveled to marine expos. We slept in our car on road trips to meet athletes and suppliers. Slowly, we built relationships. Slowly, trust followed. Then, at a small international water sports conference, we met them, an Australian manufacturer seeking a distributor in the U.S. market. They were as new and hungry as we were. The contract we signed with them in that dimly lit office changed everything. That night, we celebrated with a $10 bottle of cheap champagne and frozen appetizers on mismatched plates, staring at each other in disbelief. We had done it. The impossible dream had become possible, and we had only just begun. The years that followed were a blur of airports, trade shows, design meetings, product launches, and endless hustle. Our little brand grew from a barely known startup to a respected name in the marine sports apparel world. There were weeks when Logan and I barely slept, surviving on cold coffee and adrenaline. There were moments we almost gave up, exhausted by the weight of proving ourselves over and over again. But somehow, side by side, we pushed through every barrier. Our first major warehouse came after a nightmarish 6-month hunt and lease negotiations that nearly broke us. And yet, when we finally signed the lease, Logan danced with me under flickering fluorescent lights like we had just bought the moon. It became our rhythm. Setbacks followed by small victories, disappointment followed by resilience. Slowly, orders grew. Clients returned. The gamble we had taken on ourselves began to pay off. We didn't even realize how far we'd come until one evening, sitting cross-legged on our warehouse floor, Logan looked up from a spreadsheet and smiled at me with that familiar sparkle in his eyes. "You know what we should do." I looked at him warily. "What?" "We should buy a place by the water. A real place. Not rented, not borrowed. Ours." I laughed then, shaking my head. "You mean like a house?" "No," he said, eyes softening. "A home." I didn't dare say it aloud, but my heart leapt at the idea. We started looking casually at first, scrolling through listings late at night between client calls and shipping invoices. But then we found it, perched atop a rugged bluff in Santa Barbara, hidden behind a winding driveway framed by wild hibiscus and flowering bougainvillea, stood the villa. It wasn't perfect. The paint was faded. The shutters creaked. The garden had been overtaken by the salty wind. But the second I stepped onto the deck and saw the sweeping view of the Pacific stretching endlessly under the California sun, I knew. "This is the one," Logan said softly from beside me. I nodded, unable to speak. We emptied our savings, signed the papers with shaking hands, and crossed the threshold together into what would become our sanctuary. The work began immediately. We painted railings late into the night with music blasting through old speakers. We replaced warped floorboards, argued over kitchen tile samples, planted herbs in mismatched pots along the windowsills. We laughed, we sweated, we sometimes argued. But every stroke of paint, every piece of driftwood art, every candle and seashell was a piece of us woven into the walls. Our favorite place was the deck. White Adirondack, chairs facing the ocean, glasses of wine resting on the weathered wooden table between us. We would sit for hours watching the sky turn molten gold, then indigo as the stars blanketed the water. I remember one night in particular, the wind soft and warm, the waves gentle as a lullaby. Logan reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "Let's grow old together here," he whispered. My heart swelled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't invisible. I was home. I thought nothing, no one, could ever take that from us. I had no idea how wrong I was. The phone call that shattered everything came 2 mornings after I returned from a business trip to Southeast Asia. I was sipping my coffee on the deck of our villa, barefoot, wrapped in a soft blanket as the early fog rolled in from the sea. The horizon was just starting to glow pink and gold when my phone buzzed. Richard Harper, my father. I hesitated. I hadn't spoken to my parents in weeks, not since the last terse conversation about Vanessa's latest misunderstanding. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Evelyn, we need to talk," my father said without preamble, his voice heavy and unfamiliar. I straightened in my chair, the blanket sliding from my shoulders. "What happened?" "It's about the villa." The word slammed into me like a rogue wave. I stood up abruptly. "What about it?" "We've sold it. The ownership transfer takes place next month." For several seconds, I was too stunned to breathe. "I don't understand," I whispered, my fingers tightening around the phone. "You did what?" "Vanessa's in trouble," my father explained, his tone defensive. "She made an investment that went bad. $200,000 bad. The debt collectors are circling. We had to act quickly." My stomach turned. "And you thought the answer was to sell our home? The home Logan and I built with our blood and sweat? Without even telling me." "You barely use it, Evelyn. And Vanessa's life is at stake." His voice grew firmer, as though my anger was unreasonable. "Is a vacation house you rarely use really worth more than your sister's safety?" I pressed my hand against the cold glass door to steady myself, fury threatening to boil over. "That's Vanessa's problem, not mine," I said flatly. "How did you even manage to do this? The deed has both mine and Logan's name on it." My father paused. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, his bravado faltering. "The documents were already prepared. We had your signatures. You must have forgotten signing." My heart nearly stopped. I gripped the phone tighter, the blood draining from my face. No, I never signed anything." My voice turned ice cold. "You forged our signatures." Silence. The only sound was the waves crashing relentlessly against the cliffs below. I stared blankly at the familiar lines of our villa, the wind chime swaying gently by the kitchen window, the scattered seashells Logan had collected, the faded blue cushions on the deck chairs where we had shared so many sunsets. It all blurred as realization dawned. My parents had committed fraud against me, against their own daughter. My mind raced, equal parts disbelief and rage. This was not a misunderstanding. This was betrayal in its purest form. My father tried again, his tone urgent. Evelyn, don't overreact. We didn't have a choice. We had to protect Vanessa. She was tricked. I drew in a sharp breath. No, you didn't have to protect her. You chose to, just like you've always chosen her over me. My fingers trembled as I wiped tears I didn't even realize had fallen. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Please, Evelyn, we're family. No, this isn't just a family matter. I cut him off, voice steady but deadly calm. This is fraud, and I'm going to the police. There was a gasp on the other end, my father completely unprepared for my response. Don't be ridiculous. You'd ruin your parents' lives over a house. I stared out across the ocean, heart pounding, breath coming in shallow bursts. I spoke slowly, every syllable laced with cold finality. You've already ruined this family, Dad. You just didn't think I'd be the one to say enough. I ended the call and stood motionless, staring at the only place that had ever felt like mine, the villa Logan and I had fought so hard for, now stolen by the people who were supposed to love me the most. The morning mist thickened as I stood there alone. Only the sound of the crashing waves remained. An hour passed before I could move. My hands shook as I texted Logan, still half believing I had misheard, that this was some cruel misunderstanding that could be undone. My phone rang before I finished typing. Logan's voice, calm but urgent, filled my ear. Evelyn, are you okay? The dam inside me broke. They forged our signatures. Logan, they sold our home without even telling us. They did it for Vanessa again. There was silence on the line. Then the steel edge I knew so well entered his voice. They won't get away with this. Later that afternoon, Logan called back with news that sent my head spinning. You won't believe this. I got a call from the buyer. My heart stopped. They closed the sale already? No, Logan replied. They contacted me to verify the signatures. Evelyn, the buyer is Dylan Foster. We were in the same sailing club at university. I explained everything. I sank into a chair, my knees weak with relief. What did he say? He's pulling out of the deal. Immediately. My vision blurred as the tears came fast and hot, equal parts gratitude and rage. Thank God! It's not over yet, Logan continued, his tone measured. I also contacted our lawyer. We're filing a cease and desist order, and I've just spoken to the police. They're opening a formal investigation. I nodded slowly as the weight of what had just happened began to lift, but only slightly. That evening, Logan left his meetings early and drove straight to the villa. I met him at the door, unable to hold back any longer. He pulled me into his arms and let me cry, the sobs racking my chest after hours of holding it together. Why would they do this, Logan? I whispered, burying my face against him. Do they think they can do anything as long as it's for Vanessa? Logan gently stroked my hair. You've done nothing wrong. You have every right to stand up for what's yours. I'm proud of you. His words soothed me more than he could have known, because somewhere deep inside, the little girl who was always told to be understanding had finally said no. The next day, the police launched a full-scale investigation. I handed over every document, every email, every signature sample. Within days, the truth unraveled. My parents had known the villa was jointly owned by Logan and me. They had deliberately forged both of our signatures and submitted falsified documents to the real estate agency. The lies went deeper than I could have imagined. They told the agency, our daughter and her partner have been relocated overseas and no longer want the property. I stared blankly at the officer as he read the report aloud. My parents had spent nearly 3 months planning it all. The officer's voice hardened as he continued. Your mother, Carol Harper, also reportedly spread false rumors to neighbors, claiming you and Logan were drowning in debt and forced them to sell on your behalf. My mouth went dry. My own mother had tried to ruin my reputation, to cover up for Vanessa. I sat frozen, unable to comprehend how far they had gone. Logan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly as if to anchor me back to reality. They were going to destroy everything we've built, I whispered. They didn't care. Logan nodded grimly. They never understood. They never respected what we created. They just wanted what they could take. The final blow came when my father admitted during questioning that they had forged the sale documents after Vanessa confessed she owed more than $200,000. The scam had started small. A $10,000 get-rich-quick crypto scheme. Then more, and more, until she had drained their savings and maxed out every credit line they had. Vanessa isn't to blame, my mother sobbed to the officers. She's just not as smart as Evelyn. She was tricked. Even the detective conducting the interview was left speechless. The bitter truth settled over me like lead. My parents' obsession with protecting Vanessa had cost them their home, their dignity, and nearly cost me everything I loved. But it didn't. Not this time. I had drawn a line, and for the first time in my life, they couldn't cross it. The police report only confirmed what I had known in my bones for years. Vanessa was a hurricane of bad choices, enabled at every turn by my parents' blind devotion. I thought back to the first time the cycle had started. Vanessa was barely a freshman in college when she took out a $3,000 consumer finance loan behind my parents' backs. The reason? A luxury handbag she needed to fit in with her friends. When my parents found out, they didn't scold her. They paid it off immediately, whispering the same tired excuse they had always used. She's just a young girl. It can't be helped. 2 months later, Vanessa misused her tuition money, not on books or rent, but on an extravagant weekend trip to Las Vegas with friends and designer clothes to boost her confidence. I still remember my father's weary sigh as he transferred $30,000 from his retirement account to cover the shortfall. Vanessa lacks life experience, my mother murmured, folding her arms. She doesn't understand the value of money. I stared at them, stunned. I had spent my entire life scrimping, saving, working part-time jobs to buy second-hand textbooks and afford my own rent. And yet Vanessa could gamble with tens of thousands of dollars without so much as a lecture. It only got worse. During her 3rd year, Vanessa abruptly dropped out of college, claiming the classes were too hard and she couldn't handle the pressure. She worked part-time at a trendy restaurant for a while, but that too didn't last. Then came the boyfriend, a smooth-talking customer from the restaurant who introduced her to a so-called investment opportunity. Within months, Vanessa had lost $38,000. When my parents intervened and begged her to break off the relationship, Vanessa only glared at me bitterly. You wouldn't understand, Evelyn. You've always had everything come easy. I wanted to laugh at the cruel irony. Me, the invisible daughter, the one who had been told no at every turn, being painted as privileged by the very sister who had never heard the word no. The relationship ended eventually, but not before my parents drained more of their savings to cover the debt. It was endless. Every poor choice Vanessa made was followed by the same predictable pattern: reckless spending, crisis, tearful apologies, rescue, lather, rinse, repeat. And each time my parents made the same pitiful justification: she's fragile. She just needs support. You know how society is, Evelyn. It's too harsh on young women. The final straw had come with this latest disaster. Vanessa had been mentored by an online crypto guru, promising to double her money in just months. What began as a $10,000 experiment quickly spiraled. Vanessa took cash advances, maxed out credit cards, begged friends for loans, even lied about needing emergency medical procedures just to borrow more. By the time she admitted the truth, the debt had ballooned to over $200,000. My parents had nothing left. They had drained their retirement accounts, sold off family land, taken out a second mortgage on their house. And now they had tried to steal our home, the only thing I had ever built for myself, to save her again. As I sat at our kitchen table in the villa, the early morning light glinting off the waves, I stared blankly at the pile of police documents in front of me. A bitter truth hardened inside me. My parents had not just failed Vanessa, they had destroyed her. By shielding her from consequences at every turn, they had stunted her sense of responsibility. She had no idea how to live without someone rushing to clean up the mess behind her, and now, for the first time, there was no one left to do it. Logan came over quietly and slid a mug of tea into my hands. "You tried to warn them," he said softly. "For years." I nodded slowly, tears pricking my eyes. "They didn't listen. You did everything you could." His voice was steady, grounding me. "They made their choices, and you've made yours." I squeezed his hand tightly, the weight of decades of dysfunction pressing against my chest. "I won't let them destroy what we've built," I whispered, and I meant it. The call came late at night. I stared at the screen in disbelief as Vanessa's name flashed in bold letters. My stomach clenched. I knew why she was calling, and I knew what I had to do. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, finally, I answered. "Evelyn!" she blurted out before I could speak, her voice thick with panic and entitlement, the same tone I had heard all my life. How could you turn Mom and Dad over to the police? You've ruined everything." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath as I stared into the dark expanse of the Pacific beyond our villa windows. "I didn't ruin anything, Vanessa. They did this to themselves." "We're family," she snapped. "You don't betray family." "No, Vanessa, family doesn't steal from each other," I said quietly but firmly. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't sell your home behind your back to cover up their mistakes." There was a pause, a heavy silence. I could almost hear her scrambling for her next line of manipulation. "I'm really struggling, Evelyn. I don't have anywhere left to turn." Her voice cracked, fake vulnerability dripping from every syllable. "Please, just $50,000. That's all I need to fix this. I swear I can turn it around this time. I've got a new opportunity, a business mentor, a plan." I almost laughed, bitter and exhausted. The same speech she had delivered a dozen times before, with slightly different words, always the same ending. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the cool wood beneath my fingers. "You need to start taking responsibility for your own actions. Evelyn, you're my sister." Vanessa shouted, her panic morphing into anger. "You've always had everything. I just need one more chance." "I'm done cleaning up after you," I said flatly. My voice didn't shake. "Not this time. You've burned every bridge, Vanessa. There's no one left to save you. Not me. Not them. You've got to figure this out on your own. You're cold. You're heartless." The venom in her voice was sharp, but it slid off me like water on stone. "You want to be done with us? Fine. But don't expect me to forgive you when this all crashes down on you too." I exhaled slowly, my gaze drifting back to the dark, rolling ocean. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Vanessa," I whispered. "I'm asking for peace." I ended the call and let the phone fall to the table with a soft thud. The villa was silent except for the rhythmic sound of waves lapping the shore. The conversation had left me strangely calm, lighter than I had felt in years. It was done. The cycle was broken. I would no longer be the cleanup crew for Vanessa's messes, for my parents' enabling. Logan stepped into the room, concern flickering across his face. "Was it her?" I nodded. "She wanted more money. I said no." He smiled faintly and pulled me into his arms. "I'm proud of you." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time, the word freedom didn't feel like a distant fantasy. It felt real, it felt earned. The final police report arrived just as autumn deepened and the winds along the Santa Barbara coastline grew colder. I sat on the deck of our villa, wrapped in a thick gray sweater, the salty air brushing against my cheeks as I read the document in silence. My parents had been formally charged with attempted fraud, forgery, and providing false information to a real estate agency. They had cooperated under the weight of overwhelming evidence. In court, they received a suspended sentence. No prison time, but their reputation was in tatters, their savings obliterated. They had to sell their family home to cover what little debt they could. But even that wasn't enough. From neighbors, from whispers carried by mutual acquaintances, I learned the details of what came next. My father, once a respected accountant, was forced to resign in disgrace. My mother, who had once hosted charity galas and tea parties, now juggled 3 part-time jobs. Early mornings packing boxes in a warehouse, afternoons at a food factory, and late-night shifts at a 24-hour grocery store, ringing up canned goods for strangers. Their once pristine life crumbled, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and regret. They moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, barely able to keep up with the minimum payments still owed from Vanessa's disastrous debt spiral. I heard they had resorted to eating heavily discounted, nearly expired groceries to stretch what little money they had. One afternoon, a woman I barely knew stopped me on State Street. "I saw your mother. She's aged 20 years and months," the woman whispered, almost pityingly. She was crying by the loading dock after work. No one dared speak to her. A sharp ache twisted inside me. I wasn't made of stone. But I also knew that pity could not rewrite the years of neglect, betrayal, and cruelty they had shown me. They had chosen this path again and again, and now they were living the consequences. I later learned that my father collapsed during an overnight security job from exhaustion, but returned to work days later. They had no other option. They were trapped by the very devotion that had led them to ruin. And Vanessa? Her spiral only continued. Her credit cards had been canceled. Her consumer loans were maxed out. Friends and acquaintances had finally cut her off. Cornered, she sent me one final desperate email. "Margaret, I know you hate me, but please lend me $50,000. I have an opportunity. This time it's foolproof. I can turn it around. I swear." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded my parents' information for counseling and debt relief services. That was the only help I would offer. Logan stood by me as I pressed send and then deleted her email for good. "Why didn't we stop this sooner?" I whispered, watching the sunlight flicker over the rolling waves. "Why didn't they?" Logan wrapped his arms around my shoulders from behind, his voice soft. "Because you believed family would change. Sometimes they don't. But you did what they never could. You walked away." I stared out at the horizon. The waters shimmered under the late afternoon sun, endless and untouchable. For the first time, I didn't feel bound by guilt or duty. I was free. The past had finally let go of me, and I would never let it claim me again. Winter came slowly to the coast. The days shortened, the wind grew sharper, and the sea turned a deeper, restless blue. Logan and I spent the evenings curled up on the weathered deck chairs of our villa, watching the sun sink beyond the endless horizon. It should have felt empty, knowing my relationship with my parents and Vanessa would likely never return to what it once was. But instead it felt peaceful. It felt right. The villa stood as a quiet testament to everything we had survived, to every battle, every heartbreak, and every hard-won victory. One crisp morning, as gulls wheeled above the cliffs and the air smelled of salt and eucalyptus, Logan turned to me with that familiar, thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, brushing wind-blown strands of hair from my face. "What if we use this place for something more?" I raised an eyebrow. "More?" "Let's host marine sports programs for underprivileged kids," he said softly. "You and I know what it feels like to be invisible, to not have anyone believe in you. What if we could change that for someone else?" My heart swelled unexpectedly. I stared out at the churning ocean, the crashing waves that had once terrified me but now brought comfort. "You want to share our dream," I whispered. Logan nodded. "Your parents only ever saw this house as an asset, a thing to take and use. But for us, it's always been about hope. We could give that to kids who've never even seen the ocean before." I took his hand in mine, feeling the warmth, the steady calm I had always found there. Let's do it. And we did. That spring, we opened our doors for the first group of kids. We taught them to paddle, to balance, to trust the pull of the wind. We watched their faces light up as they caught their first waves, their laughter ringing across the water like music. One afternoon, as I gathered towels from the deck, a small girl with tangled hair and wide, dark eyes ran up to me. Clutching a seashell tightly in her palm, she pressed it into my hand. "Thank you, Miss Evelyn," she whispered shyly. "This is the best day I've ever had." I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my chest. I looked out over the beach, where Logan stood with the other kids, encouraging, guiding, just like he had once done for me. My parents had seen me as a backup plan. Vanessa had seen me as a safety net. But these children, they simply saw me. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Logan and I sat side by side on the deck, listening to the waves and feeling the breeze cool against our skin. "You did it," he murmured. "You found your own family." I smiled softly, resting my head against his shoulder. "Sometimes family isn't about blood," I said. "It's about the people who stand beside you when everything else falls apart." I watched the moonlight dance on the water and felt a deep, steady peace settle over me at last. I had lost my old family, but I had built something stronger. I had chosen my own life, and that choice, above everything, had set me free.